walk through the process here, talk about the certification process and a little bit about the history and so forth. All right, starting off with a little bit about the nutrient management history. Nutrient management the initiative started back in 1989 with a voluntary nutrient management program. In 1992, we came along with the certification and licensing, and that's where the state and the regulations say that you have to be certified to write nutrient management plans in the state of Maryland and so forth. Many of you have probably heard of the 1998 Water Quality Improvement Act, when the legislature passed the Water Quality Improvement Act after the fish kills on the eastern shore in the Chesapeake Bay with the Fisteria and so forth. Came along the Water Quality Improvement Act, which made nutrient management mandatory in the state of Maryland. Okay. So with that, then came along 2000, when we were trying to finalize regulations according to that act and so forth. In 2003, then 4 and 5, there were some adjustments to the regulations and the law at that point in time. Back in 2009, the MDE general permit for AFOs took effect. In 2011, we had the Fertilizer Use Act and revised the Urban Nutrient Management Program. Remember, there are two sections of the Maryland Nutrient Management Program, the agricultural side and the urban turf grass side of the program. And in October of 2012, there were some major revisions to the nutrient application requirements, and that's when setbacks became mandatory in the state. June of 2015, June 8th of 2015, is when the phosphorus management tool regulations came into play. And then in January of 2017, we amended the nutrient application requirements with a few changes. As we go through, I'll try to point out into the book and so forth of where we need to be. At this point, the Water Quality Improvement Act was legislation that required all farm operators that met certain criteria to have a mandated nutrient management plan for their agricultural operation. It's what we refer to as the Nutrient Management Law, and it's Article 8-801 to 8-807, and that is found in your blue manual back in the green tabs. It's the first, should be the first green tab that says Nutrient Management Law in there, and behind that should be the regulations that go along with it. Okay, that would be in that following tab. And then we call that, the regulations are referred to as COMAR, Code of Maryland Regulations. So there were several chapters of that that we refer to. COMAR 15-2004 is our certification and licensing chapter. 2005 talks about our manure transport project. 15-2006 is fertilizer application requirements. 15-2007 is our agricultural operation nutrient management plan requirements. 15-2008 is nutrient management plan content criteria. You all, as becoming certified consultants, certainly need to be paying attention to 15-2004, 06, 07, and 08 as you're getting familiar with regulations. Okay, if you're going to write plans, then you're going to become real familiar with 15-2008 and what's required to be written in the plans. 15-2010 is the turf grass regulations for our what we refer to as the Urban Nutrient Management Program. It requires certifications and so forth. But we'll go through 15-2004. 0.01 of the regulations start out that say applies to individuals or businesses that prepare a farm nutrient management plan. Again, the plans is for the management of essential primary nutrients, N, P, and K, to achieve optimum crop production and protect water quality. Okay, plans contain nutrient recommendations with expected yield, existing nutrient levels in the soil, so your soil test, organic materials, manure samples, so forth, optimum nutrient application timing and placement. and other BMPs, liming, tillage, crop rotations, etc. are some of the things that go into that. Point 02 talks about all the definitions and so forth, and about, for example, if crop nutrient needs means the primary nutrient requirements of a crop determined as pounds of NPK. All right. So, point 03 of that chapter, certification licensing requirements, says that an individual may not act as a certified consultant unless certified by the department, that department being the Maryland Department of Agriculture. A person may not engage in the business of writing plans unless licensed by the Maryland Department of Agriculture. Now, there are things out, there are some of the changes through the years basically said, hey, you can become certified and write your own nutrient management plan for your own farm operation. All right, and we have a separate certification for those folks. And it says that no license is required if you're just writing for your own farm operation. Okay. Point 04 of the certification application and exam requirements. You need to submit an application form to MDA at least 15 days prior to the exam. Again, this morning we kind of talked about this proof of education and experience, a degree in agriculture related field, 1 year practical experience acceptable to MDA, or a combination of both. So again, this is where, as Trish would say, don't be modest, put down what you have, what you've done, and put it on there. All right. Again, there's an applicable fee of $50 except for government agencies. It's a one-time payment for farmers becoming certified. And again, for the examination, we typically offer the exam once a year. We announce it once a year, 30 days before the exam. All right. We provide required training. All right. Or a list of study materials, which you have in the front of your folders, the areas that you should focus on and so forth to study from. And there's also websites out there with this information on as well. Okay. We do allow for retakes. You could have to resubmit your application and again repay the fees to do that. Offer required training and certification for farm. We do offer this for farm operators for specific types of operations at least once a year. Again, that was a provision that was put in back in mid-2000s. All right. For our certification, we certify as a nutrient management consultant or a certified operator. You would meet the chapter requirements, satisfy MDA's educational experiences and training requirements, and pass the MDA approved examination. All right. Employment requirements: consultants must be licensed or employed by a licensed company or person if engaging in the business of writing plans. So if you're going to be writing plans, the business has to be licensed, okay, and employ somebody. Now, you could own the business and be the certified person, but that would be how that would work. You'd have to have the certification and the business license. All right. Certified consultants, again, operating their own farm and only writing for their own farm, does not need a business license. All right. For renewal, these certificates, all these certificates are issued for 1 year, and then they would go to a 3-year renewal process. So consider the first year kind of like a probationary type period. It's initially issued for 1 year and renewed every 3 years. Again, submit a renewal application form. We would send you a form in the mail saying, hey, you're about to expire. You need to send in the applicable fees, again, except for government agencies, etc. For certified consultants, which is what you're all here for, working towards today, is 12 hours of CEUs every 3 years. Completed for the consultants. It's 6 hours of continuing educations every 3 years for certified farm operators. All right. Again, complying with all the requirements of the on the preparation of the nutrient management plan and all other requirements such as reporting and record keeping. Failure to renew on time could result in having to retake the exam, which I hear is not a good choice. So once you're certified, keep your certification up. All right. Submit your application form. All right, for our new license. Again, we're going to pay the appropriate fee, except for the government agency, $100 for corporation and company, or $50 for an individual. You have to have at least one certified consultant. All right, and agree to comply with the chapter requirements. So basically, you're saying you're going to follow the regulations. And again, that initial license is issued for 1 year. It renews every 3 years. Again, that's when you jump up, and depending where you're at, you're either that 150 fee, maintain at least one active consultant, and keep up with the regulations. Point 11 talks about the record keeping and reporting requirements of the license holder shall file an annual report by September 30th of each year for the previous year that they wrote plans for. That report indicates acres by watershed and so forth that you have written plans for in the state. So those need to be filed on a timely basis, usually come out in September. We want to make sure we're keeping the record keeping up to date. Keep your copies of all nutrient management plans and all information that you have in your file. 5 years of records are made available to MDA upon request. We do have the authority to inspect you as nutrient management consultants and how you write the nutrient management plans. All right. As with every regulation, there's this part in here that talks about denial, suspension, and revocation. And, you know, MDA has always tried to work with everybody to avoid these types of things, but occasionally, you know, if you don't work with us, occasionally we have to exercise this situation here. It gives you an opportunity for a hearing. Some of the violations would be providing misleading, false information when applying for the license, misleading, false, fraudulent reporting, offering or preparing plans without the certificate, no certified consultant working under your company, again, failing to meet reporting requirements and allowing MDA to inspect those records, and failure to meet continuing education requirements. And of course, with any action, you know, there's usually a process that you can go through to be reinstated and so forth. And again, I'm not going to spend time on that and dwell on that. We're going to talk a little bit about the next chapter, 152006, which talks about nutrient and commercial fertilizer application requirements for agricultural land. Applies to land greater than 10 acres of agricultural land owned or managed. Needs to have an applicator voucher, good for 3 years, be a certified consultant or a certified farm operator, or they have to hire a certified consultant. So in order to apply nutrients to agricultural land to 10 or more acres, you need to be one of those three, or do one of those three things. All right. 03 and 4 say that agricultural land, you know, if we're looking at commercial application of nutrients, which is for hire, they have to have a certified consultant on staff or work under the supervision of a certified consultant. So if you're hiring a company, you need to make sure they have a certified consultant on staff or so forth for doing that. And they need to apply the nutrients according to the nutrient management plan. All right. There is record keeping requirements for ag land as a commercial applicator. They have to records of being certified or working under that supervision. They have to keep for 3 years the application records, the type, the amount of nutrients applied, crop acreage receiving nutrients, the location and timing of that application, and the analysis of that nutrients applied. All right. And those folks are subject to inspection as well. Again, we get into this part of denial, suspension, revocation. We get into this failure to meet educational requirements, failure to apply and supervise nutrient applications, so forth. And of course, there's an appeal process for that and an opportunity to hear that. So let's go on to the 152007 and look at where we're at with the agricultural requirements. Again, this applies to farm or an agricultural operation requires the operator to develop and implement NMP-based nutrient management plans for ag operations by certain deadlines. All right. Agricultural operation means or activity that tills, crops, keeps pasture, or produces an agricultural product, including livestock, poultry, plants, trees, sod, food, feed, or fiber by in-ground and out-of-ground container or other culture. And has a gross annual income of $2,500 gross income, or has 8 or more animal units, an animal unit being equivalent to 1,000 pounds of weight. So if you have 8,000 pounds of livestock out there, then you'd be required to have a nutrient management plan. I mentioned this Maryland Nutrient Management Manual. It's the blue covered book. That's what we started looking in there. This is going to have a lot of the recommendations and so forth as we go forward in it. So one of the things that's .04 is the plan development and implementation deadlines. Now these deadlines are well past, but anyway, for chemical fertilizer, when the law passed, NMP-based had to be developed by December of 2001, implemented by the following year of 2002. Biosolids and animal manure, N-based by 2001, implemented by 2002, and then NMP-based by July 1 of 04 and July 1 of 05 implemented. So we're past these deadlines. We are implementing these plans, nitrogen and phosphorus based, as we move forward. Okay? For plan development, again, plan must be prepared by a certified consultant to meet the implementation deadlines, which we already mentioned. Must address all aspects of the operation. One thing you'll find as you're talking with operators and landowners and so forth, you know, yeah, I farm, you know, 200 acres of corn or 300 acres of corn and so forth, but they forget to tell you about the 8 head of cattle standing on the back 42. So you need to address all aspects of the operation, including animals and everything. Sometimes you have to ask those questions when you're talking to folks. Must identify all management and disposition of all primary nutrients, produced, imported, and or exported. Okay? Again, if we're importing a nutrient source, as mentioned in the earlier presentation, such as food waste, for example, it needs to be addressed in the nutrient management plan. All right? We need to address manure management for the entire operation, not just one part of it. The plan shall be developed based on COMAR 152008, so it needs to be developed based on our regulations that's on the chapter for writing the plans. Plan updates. The 4 things are, if a crop rotation changes, soil tests indicate a change in recommendations, acreage managed changes is 10% or 30 acres, whichever is less, or the animal unit change of 10% or greater, and there's also a bit in there about manure and whether it changes significantly or not. Now, this is usually where I say, if we have 10 head of cattle and we sell 1, we're not going to see a significant difference in change, so we can use a little judgment on that. But if you have, you know, 500 head and you change that by 10%, then you're changing your manure production pretty significantly. All right. So, again, talking about required plan content, the plan identification, you need the farm operator information, location, plan information for the type of operation, consultant information, which would be your information if you're writing the plan, the map or aerial photograph, listing the location and boundaries, acreage, and clearly recognizable. Also indicating any setbacks. I didn't put that on that bullets, but I should have. Indicating setbacks on there, and we'll talk about that as we move forward. Soil test results, no more than 3 years old, and summary of nutrient recommendations, which is a compilation of all your individual field or management unit specific information. So you're putting all that stuff together. okay? And to clarify some of that for required plan content, you know, field or management unit specific information covers all this. The date of the recommendations, the account IDs, the watershed code, map unit, basically anything that you have about that field which you need this information on would be summarized in that information, all right? Plan maintenance information, we just talked about that a little bit ago, but we also need to indicate the length of the time that the plan is effective, the circumstances of the changes, which we talked about there, the new crop, the change in 10% for 30 acres, and any BMP recommendations for achieving optimal fertility. All right, so we talk about 05 and nutrient rates. We need to be consistent with MDA technical standards and criteria, which is in the blue book. All right, for example, section 1B is all your general crop production recommendations, corn, soybeans, hay. Section 1B has all the university recommendations in it that we have to follow according to the nutrient management law. All right. So, nutrient rates are based on University of Maryland crop nutrient recs or alternative standards acceptable to the department. All right. Expected crop yield or production goal is the average of the 3 highest yielding years of the last 5 consecutive years. If yield info is greater than 5 years, we use 60% of the highest yielding years. And if yield records are not available, we can use soil productivity information or yields from similar fields. This is a last resort, all right? Absolute last resort. By now, most operators should have some sort of records of what their yields are, you know, crop insurance or something that they should be able to, you know, document some yields. All right. Soil analysis results need to be for each management unit, however that's been defined, or you've defined that for them. Based on the soil test lab acceptable to MDA, we have a list of soil test labs that we can do conversions back to University of Maryland standards, back to the FIV, okay? That's all on our website. And those soil tests are valid for 3 years with some exceptions and justifications for that, all right? But typically, your typical crop fertility sample is valid for 3 years. Some operators choose to update it on an annual basis. If that's the case, then their plan would have to be updated, all right? So your determination of limiting nutrient in the broad sense is if your soil fertility P is less than 150, you can use nitrogen-based as your plant needs when it comes to organic nutrients. However, if you're 150 or greater FIV, that throws you into this category where you have to use the phosphorus site index and in the very near future, the phosphorus management tool. Okay. So again, we're looking at some more of the required plant content. When we talk about natural organic fertilizers, must have a nutrient analysis at least once a year using acceptable sampling methods. Analysis must be done as close to nutrient application as possible, and a baseline or book value. I'm going to say baseline can be used. A book value can only be used as an imminent startup of an operation in terms of some of the cost share programs. All right. Method of nutrient application. Again, we're trying to minimize N and P losses. So we want to identify techniques for accurate and uniform application and split application of N for soils with high leaching potential. Nutrient application requirements, again, general, as close to plant uptake as possible to maximize efficiency and minimize movement. We need to be consistent with Maryland Nutrient Management Manual, Section 1D. In that book, if there's something that you should memorize, that's one that you should look at, Section 1D. That covers all of the setbacks and nutrient application requirements and dates and so forth. All right. So, and our temporary stockpiling. Manure management, if applicable, again, we need to account for current management of manure, stockpiling, handling, and storage, and so forth. All right, moving on to nutrient application setbacks. All right, in 2012, regulations were changed and adopted that required farm operations to address setbacks. Okay, again, it's a vegetated area of prescribed width where nutrient-containing material may not be applied, as measured from the edge of the surface water, including perennial and intermittent streams. Again, we're considering an intermittent stream means a stream or the reach of the stream that is below the local water table for at least some part of the year and obtains its flow from both surface runoff and groundwater discharge. Then we have our exceptions that does not include, surface water does not include our ephemeral streams, defined as streams which flow only in direct response to precipitation in the immediate watershed and which have a channel bottom that is always above the local water table. In a nutshell, if it rains tonight, tomorrow you have water in it, and the next day it's gone, we're not going to require that to be fenced out, all right, or require a setback, okay? Irrigation and treatment ditches pretty much are out. Field ditches, which are for the purpose of this exception, are defined as channelized waterways that as provided in the USDA NRCS National Cooperative Soil Survey are not within a floodplain soil map unit, a hydric soil, or a soil mapping unit that has a B slope or steeper. Basically, for the most part, man-made ditches and so forth, when I'm referring to a lot of the ditches on the eastern shore would be excluded from that at this point. Now, I want to make one distinction. That's from the setback of nutrient application, not from the phosphorus management tool or the PSI. It would still be considered surface water. All right? So we have to deal with those things as we move forward here. And there's some other requirements under CAFO programs and so forth that if they have other rules or other regulations that are more strict than what MDA would, for example, then you would have to use those in that operation. If it was a CAFO, for example, you would have to use those requirements as your setbacks, all right? So I'm not trying to confuse anybody, but basically the most strict regulation wins out in a lot of cases, all right? So, general provisions here with our setbacks is an application using a broadcast method, example spinners, splashers, either with or without incorporation require 35-foot setback. A directed spray application or injection of crop nutrients requires 10 foot. All right. Accepting perennial forage crops, crops grown for hay or pasture, vegetation in the 10-foot setback area may not include row crop or crop plants. It cannot contain the same plants. So, for example, if you got a cornfield, you're going to need something a little different in that 10-foot area. Most people tend to let it in grass. Pastures and hay fields are subject to that 10-foot setback as well. Nutrients may not be applied mechanically within the setback except as provided in subsection 2B6. Livestock shall be excluded from the setback to prevent direct deposition of nutrients within the setback. What's that mean? And how do we achieve that? Fencing. All right, so we're all on the same page. As an alternative to fencing livestock, however, to make things a little muddier, there was a provision put in as an alternative to fencing livestock. A person shall work with the Soil Conservation District to develop and implement a soil conservation and water quality plan with BMPs such as stream crossings, alternative watering facilities, pasture management, or other MDA-approved BMPs. So, whatever you do, If you can get your soil conservation district to say, if we put this watering facility in, we don't think you're going to need fencing. It's going to achieve the water quality protection that's needed. If you can get the soil conservation district to sign off on that, then we would accept it. As an alternative to nutrient application setback, MDA may approve other BMPs that it finds equally protective of water quality and stream health and so forth. This is what I'm going to call futuristic. As we move forward and other BMPs come up and so forth, we can approve those BMPs and we don't have to go back and change the regulations to do it. Sacrifice lots of less than 75% grass or grass lagoon mix shall maintain a 35-foot setback. Natural and either perennial and intermittent streams, the setbacks apply. It's kind of a quick short chart here. Channelized and perennial and meeting these requirements, which lies within that floodplain, soil map unit, the hydric soil, the slope greater in terms of B slope or greater in a stream, it would apply. Channelized and intermittent ditch does not apply. Ephemeral, natural, channelized ditch does not apply. And again, here's just an example of what we're trying to say. In this 10-foot area is a no nutrient application, all right? Here's our directed application spot between this 10 and 35 foot. So we can come in here with our planters and plant. We can apply nutrients with our spray rigs and so forth because they have a set spray pattern and so forth. However, if we're using a box spreader to apply manure, we got to stay out here at our 35 feet setback. This was a nutrient application setback template that the department developed to basically provide guidance in nutrient management plans about whether or not you as consultants have identified the setbacks and so forth, because it is technically on the consultant to determine the setbacks. Okay, in the regulations, that responsibility comes back to the consultant identifying those setbacks. All right, so we developed a chart that you could use. It's on our website. We basically look for the farm name, is surface water present, and so forth. The field, you know, which setback are we referring to? The 10-foot, the 35-foot, so forth, and indicating that on that chart. It's pretty self-explanatory. We did indicate down here some things of what broadcast application and so forth is, and talking about sacrifice lots. So that can be downloaded off the website at any time. Nutrient application timing, again, I mentioned dates and so forth. These are some things you might want to keep in mind. Spring and summer application, which we went through the process March 1 to September 9th. For chemical fertilizer and organic fertilizers, which is what we're calling manures and biosolids, it's allowed for an existing crop or crops to be planted. Applications, again, must be in accordance with Maryland Nutrient Management Manual. So you're back to that Section 1B for your traditional ag crops. We still have this in here. Organic fertilizers shall be injected or incorporated within 48 hours except direct deposit by livestock, permanent pastures, hay production, HEL land, operators who choose to use no-till as a farming practice. Okay? If you're no-tilling and you're using no-till as your farming practice, you do not have to incorporate. I believe that was mentioned a little bit yesterday. Land with crops receiving spray irrigation. All right? That bit in there about the no-till farming, that was a change of 2017, so that was what I would refer to as an amendment to the nutrient application guidelines. Here's a date change that happened as a result of that amendment. For fall application is now considered September 10th through December 15th. All right. For organic fertilizers, it's allowed for an existing crop or a crop to be planted in the fall or the following spring. Applications must be in accordance with the Nutrient Management Manual, must be injected or incorporated within the 48 hours except using the same exceptions as we did in the spring for the fall. Applications may not be applied to fallow land, but a cover crop shall be planted. In other words, may be applied, we can apply it to fallow land, but we have to plant a cover crop. All right? So, if you're going to plant into bare soil, you're going to have a crop or plant a cover crop behind it. Planting shall occur no later than November 15th, and again, those applications need to be in accordance with the Nutrient Management Manual. So in other words, we're looking at putting on nutrients in the fall for a crop that's probably for next spring, but you got to have a cover crop out there to protect the soil and everything and hold nutrients. All right. Again, continuing with the dates, nutrient application rates shall be determined based on a Nutrient Management Manual by either the N and P-based criteria. So if you're using P-based, fall crops shall be based on P recommendations, which is your soil test P recommendation. For spring crops, you may not exceed the 1-year P removal rate of that crop. You have to follow any P site index provisions if you fall into that situation. And you may not exceed 50 pounds of plant available nitrogen per acre. Again, talking fall for N-based, again, we're looking at following the Nutrient Management Manual for fall crops. For spring crops, again, we may not exceed 50 pounds of plant available nitrogen per acre. If there's any emergency situations in the fall in dealing with manures or so forth, we ask that you contact the regional representative if we run into any immediate overflow situations or something like that. I'll talk a little bit more about that emergency situations as we talk about winter. The winter time frames have changed. We're looking at December 16th to February 28th. Again, no winter application of chemical fertilizer to cropland except N for green up when tillering begins for small grains, perennial forage crops as outlined in the Nutrient Management Manual. Each year, MDA, at least for the last several years, we've reached growing degree days and stuff before March 1. Now, the only cap to that is the regulations allow us to go out before March 1, but no earlier than we can't go out any earlier than February 15th. Okay, so it does allow a 2-week window that the department can, adjust that date a little bit for green up of small grains and so forth. All right. Again, certain nutrients for greenhouse production, vegetables, and small fruits listed in the Nutrient Management Manual, Section 1B. Of course, potassium and liming materials, we're not right. You can apply those, but all right. December 16th, again, for the winter, organic fertilizer applications for cropland, provided that there's inadequate storage. Again, we got some dates in there. If your capacity be exceeded before March 1, it's non-stackable and no other reasonable option to management. Right now, we're dealing with operations that this applies to that it's less than 50 animal units. They have until 2020 to get their storage is in place. We've already passed some of the time frames for those that are over 50 animal units. Okay, and again, you're catching on to a theme here that we got to follow the rates in the Nutrient Management Manual. Now, when we do have to apply in the winter time, again, stackable is equal to or less than 60% moisture. So if your material is that, it's stackable material and you can't apply it. But if you're 60% or above, you can potentially apply it in the winter. One of the amendments that were made is on saturated soil, snow-covered ground greater than 1 inch, or hard frozen ground greater than 2 inches was added under the winter provision. It was also added under the spring and fall. Okay, so in the spring and the fall, this provision is in there. Okay, you can't apply to anything with slopes greater than 7%. The rates of application are minimized and the available acreage used to the greatest extent practical. Rates per acre cannot exceed the 1-year P removal rate or 50 pounds of plant available nitrogen for the next harvested crop. Something that was also amended was any winter applied nutrients will be deducted from the next harvested crop. So anything you apply in the winter comes off your spring crop. So we recognize that there's situations where we may have to do this, but at the same time, we're penalizing you on the other end and taking it away from your spring crop because you need to be moving to storage or something. All right? A setback of 100 feet from all surface waters shall be maintained unless best management practices providing water quality protection or equivalent are in place. So in this case, in the wintertime, your setbacks increase to 100 feet during the winter. After July 1, this was one of the dates, this was part of where we're going to come in and talk about emergency applications. After July 1, no winter application of nutrient sources to agricultural land. Again, I mentioned the animal operations of less than 50 animal units. They have until 2020 to get storage in place. Except in an emergency situation, this is going to only apply to liquid manure, liquids only, and it has to be on-farm generated manure only. You cannot be importing material into your farm and filling up your manure structure and so forth, causing the problem for an overflow. And again, you need to contact MDA and work with MDA if you fall into that. Exceptions are mentioned: dairy or livestock operations with less than 50 animal units, municipal wastewater treatment plants with a design flow capacity of less than 500,000 gallons per day. This exception right here expires on February 28th of 2020. The prohibition against winter application does not apply to potassium, liming material, or manure directly deposited by livestock, or certain nutrients for greenhouse production, vegetable crops, small fruit, and so forth. If there's a recommendation for it in the winter, in the manual, then it would be allowed. All right? When we talk about temporary stockpiling of organic nutrient sources, again, when other immediate use options and alternatives are not available, temporary field stockpiling staging of organic nutrient sources is allowed. One of the requirements is that you use all your existing storage first before you do any of that. Temporary field stockpiling staging provides greater environmental protection than fall or winter application of nutrients or applying nutrients too far ahead of normal planting time and crop uptake. Existing storage, again, shall be fully used prior to stockpiling material in the field. All material staged in the stockpile shall be land applied the first spring following the placement of the stockpile. So basically, if we start stockpiling something now, when next spring rolls around, that pile has to be removed. There's been some things in terms of composting. We do allow composting, but you're going to have to follow the composting process. It's a process. It isn't just putting it on a pile and 10 years later coming back and removing it. All right, there is a process for it in terms of temperatures, aeration, all those types of things, turning it over, all that in process there, and you're going to have to document and show that on an implementation review for you to stand there and say, oh, that's my compost pile. All right. Materials shall be field stockpiled or staged temporary in a manner that prevents any nutrient runoff. There's some other guidelines from distances to roads, or not distance to roads, property lines, houses and residents, those types of things, all in that nutrient management guidelines, application guidelines. So become very familiar with that if you're going to be writing nutrient management plans. All right, there's some additional requirements in 1520-08 in regards to out-of-ground production. Again, when we're talking about out-of-ground production, we're talking container nursery type stuff. about listing the number of plants grown by the categories and sizes of the total growing area here. Summary of nutrient recommendations listing all nutrient sources and quantities to be applied, the description of the application methods. There's an environmental risk assessment that has to be done, and general management recommendations, equipment calibrations, timing, and other management to reduce nutrient losses. Specific management recommendations, grouping plants, monitoring water and nutrient needs to reduce runoff, leachate, and water contaminant. All right, a program for monitoring runoff if you're greater than the zero risk on the environmental risk assessment. And the plan maintenance changes a little bit in terms of the length of the plan. The change in area of 20% or 5 acres, whichever is less. And again, a substantial change in production method. Again, the basis of the nutrient recommendations is label recommendations on the fertilizer use, University of Maryland recommendations, recommendations from other states, research data from other accredited universities, general nutrition guidelines of similar plants. Again, a lot of the nursery greenhouse stock we don't have specific field recommendations for, so this was what was determined to be our guidelines for determining those recommendations. And any other general growing practices on similar conditions. All right, talking about our management recommendations, environmental risk assessment for outer ground is in the nutrient management manual. Maintain a zero or low risk is what we're trying to maintain. Specific BMVs to reduce those risks, appropriate nutrient application methods and timings. Operators are required to attend a training on minimizing nutrient losses for that. And this is, a lot of times this is, operators in this situation are actually encouraged to go through the being certified to write their own plan and so forth through John Lee Cox and Andrew Rispy are the ones who put those trainings on in that case. Again, recommendations for monitoring runoff if it's greater than a zero risk, and we get into all this, you know, low risk, you have to test twice a year during the season, medium or high risk, you're monitoring monthly, and so forth. So as your risk goes up, you have more requirements to do on a nursery greenhouse operation. And with that said, the exam date will be August 4th here in one of these rooms down here from 9 to 11. And I'll say good luck to everybody. And if there's any questions, we'll go from there.